After our wedding, my husband said his family was taking our honeymoon trip to Bali without me. So I left for Hawaii without telling them, and now his mom is furious I didn't stay at home. The past few days of my life have been straight out of a soap opera. I never expected to be treated like an object by my own husband, who, mind you, got married to me just a couple of days ago. Let me give you guys some context, so you can understand how I ended up in this mess. If I am being frank, I've always been a people pleaser. Growing up as the eldest daughter in a traditional household, I was taught early on to put others' needs before my own. My parents were loving but strict, and their expectations for me were high. I was the first in my family to go to college, the first to get a well-paying job, and now, I was the first to get married. My parents were proud, and I felt the weight of their expectations more than ever. Almost 2 years ago, I met James, 29M. He was charming, kind, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. We were introduced by mutual friends at a casual get-together, and from that moment on, we were inseparable. His family was a big part of his life, something I admired at first. I was raised in a small, tight-knit family, so I understood the importance of family bonds. However, it quickly became clear that James' family operated a bit differently. They were overbearing, involved in every decision he made, and constantly in each other's business. At first, I chalked it up to their closeness, something to be envied rather than criticized. But as our relationship grew more serious, I started noticing how James would often put his family's needs before ours. There were countless weekends when we had plans, only for them to be canceled because his parents or siblings needed something. It wasn't just about helping out occasionally. James treated every family request like a top priority, regardless of what we had planned. Despite these red flags, I loved James. I convinced myself that once we were married, things would change. After all, we would be starting our own family, right? I assumed that once we tied the knot, James would naturally prioritize our relationship. I couldn't have been more wrong. The wedding itself was a beautiful but exhausting event. His family, of course, had a hand in everything. It felt like it wasn't me and James getting married, but his whole family. From the guest list to the decorations, nothing was done without their input. I had imagined my wedding day would be a celebration of our love, but instead, it felt like a show orchestrated by his family. I should have called off the wedding then, but I was too in love and too naive to see the truth. Even though I was frustrated, I kept my feelings to myself, determined not to let anything ruin our special day. I told myself that things would get better after we were married, that James and I would have our own life separate from his family's influence. After the wedding, I was excited about our honeymoon. It was supposed to be our time to unwind, relax, and enjoy each other's company without any interruptions. We had planned to spend 2 weeks in Bali, a dream destination for both of us. It was a compromise. I wanted to go to Europe, but James insisted on somewhere his family had been before and could recommend. I reluctantly agreed, thinking it would still be romantic and beautiful. I had envisioned lazy days on the beach, exploring temples, and romantic dinners under the stars. Little did I know, my honeymoon would turn out to be nothing like I imagined. The day after our wedding, we were scheduled to leave for the airport in the late afternoon. James had been acting a bit off since the night before, but I attributed it to the post-wedding exhaustion. As I was finishing packing, he asked if we could talk. I remember thinking it was a bit odd, but I brushed it off and agreed. We sat down in the living room, and that's when he dropped the bombshell. He told me that his family had decided to turn our honeymoon into a family vacation. His parents, siblings, and even a few cousins would be joining us. But the real kicker was that they didn't think I should come along. According to James, I was now a part of the family, and as the newest member, it was expected that I stay behind to take care of the household chores while they enjoyed the trip. I looked at James, searching for any sign that he realized how absurd and hurtful this was, but he seemed entirely oblivious. He even smiled slightly, saying that this was a great opportunity for me to bond with his family and show them how dedicated I was to becoming a part of their unit. He assured me that we could always plan another trip in the future, but for now, this was what his family wanted and expected. At that moment, something inside me snapped. I realized that this wasn't just about the honeymoon, it was about the pattern of disregard and control that had been present throughout our relationship. If I accepted this, I would be setting the precedent for a lifetime of being sidelined and disrespected by both my husband and his family. But instead of reacting with the anger and hurt I felt bubbling inside, I took a deep breath and forced a smile. I told James that I understood and that if this was what he and his family wanted, I would respect their wishes. He seemed relieved by my response, thanking me for being so understanding and promising that he would make it up to me. As James busied himself with packing for his new family trip, I excused myself and went into the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and allowed myself a moment to process everything. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I knew I had to take control of the situation and make a decision that honored my own needs and self-respect. I thought about where I could go and what I could do to reclaim this time for myself. Then it hit me: my parents own a beautiful vacation home in Hawaii. They had initially offered it to us for our honeymoon, but James had insisted on Bali, saying it was more exotic and adventurous. Now, it seemed like the perfect place for me to escape, reflect, and enjoy some much-needed peace and solitude. Without wasting any time, I booked a last-minute flight to Maui, scheduled to depart that evening. I quickly packed my bags and decided to get away without telling James and his family. Before leaving, I wrote a brief note to James, explaining that since he would be enjoying Bali with his family, I had my own chores to take care of. I wished him a pleasant trip and told him we could talk when we both returned. I left the note on the kitchen counter, grabbed my luggage, and headed to the airport without looking back. I felt a mix of emotions swirling inside me: anger, sadness, betrayal, but also a profound sense of liberation. For the first time in a long while, I was putting myself first and making a choice that honored my own happiness and well-being. I arrived at my parents' vacation home late at night, greeted by the soothing sound of waves crashing against the shore and the gentle rustling of palm trees in the breeze. The house was cozy and inviting, with large windows that offered breathtaking views of the ocean. I settled in quickly, feeling a sense of comfort and belonging that had been missing for a while. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried my best to forget the fact that I had just gotten married and my husband wasn't around. I treated myself to spa days, indulged in delicious local cuisine, and even took up surfing lessons, a lifelong dream of mine. I also used this time for deep reflection. I thought about my relationship with James, how we had started, and how we had ended up in this situation. I realized that I had been so eager to fit into his world and please his family that I had lost sight of my own needs and desires. I had ignored warning signs and compromised on my boundaries, all in the name of love and acceptance. This realization was both painful and empowering. And so, I came to a decision. I deserved better than to be treated as an afterthought in my own marriage. I deserved a partner who respected me, valued my feelings, and was willing to prioritize our relationship. I knew then that if James couldn't understand and respect that, I would be better off without him. As my time in Hawaii came to an end, I felt rejuvenated and at peace with my decision. I packed my bags and prepared to return home, ready to confront the situation head-on and stand up for myself. When I landed back home, I turned on my phone to find almost hundreds of messages and missed calls from James and his family. They weren't concerned about my well-being but downright angry for not doing the job they had given me. James had left multiple voicemails, his tone growing increasingly frustrated with each one. His family members had also reached out, some expressing confusion over my absence, while others outright accused me of being selfish and immature. James' mother had sent a particularly scathing message, calling me ungrateful and accusing me of disrespecting their family traditions. She went on about how I had missed a crucial opportunity to prove my worth as a daughter-in-law and how disappointed they all were in me. My sister-in-law did the same. Her texts were something with the effect of that I was a disappointment to her family. There were certain rules and traditions in her family and I was just being disrespectful. She made several comments about my family and how we were ill-mannered people with poor habits. Reading these messages, I was angry more than ever. How could they make such comments about me when they had interrupted my honeymoon? I could take their insults, but making comments about my family was something I would not bear. I was also struck by a sense of clarity. Their reactions only reinforced my belief that I had made the right decision by standing up for myself. I have told my parents to stay out of contact with James and his family for the time being. I haven't told them yet about the whole thing, because I didn't want to trouble them. As of now, I'm staying with a friend, trying to figure out my next steps. James continues to insist that I apologize and come back home. He says we can work things out if I just learn to prioritize family. But after everything that's happened, I'm not sure I want to. So, Reddit, aita for going on my own vacation instead of staying home to do chores while my husband went on a family trip during our honeymoon? Update 1. Hi guys, it's been a few days since I posted, and I'm overwhelmed by the support and advice from everyone. I've read every comment, and it's given me a lot to think about. After my initial post, James called me again, this time sounding more desperate. He said that his family was pressuring him to resolve the situation and that they were willing to forgive me if I apologized. The sheer audacity of that statement nearly made me drop my phone. They would forgive me? For what, exactly? For not bending to their outrageous demands? For choosing my own happiness for once? I told James that I needed more time to think and hung up before I said something I might regret. I've been staying with my friend, who has been an absolute rock through all of this. She's been reminding me daily that I deserve to be treated with respect and that I shouldn't have to prove my worth to anyone, least of all to a family that sees me as a servant. We've spent hours talking through everything, and she's been a constant source of support, helping me see things more clearly. After my conversation with James, I reached out to my parents. They were shocked when they heard what happened. My mom, who had been so excited for the wedding, was devastated that this was how things were unfolding so soon after. My dad was livid. They've offered their full support, even suggesting that I move back home for a while to clear my head. The thought is tempting, especially considering the barrage of messages I've been getting from James and his family. James has been flooding me with texts and voicemails, each one more infuriating than the last. At first, he tried to play the guilt card, reminding me of the vows we took, asking if I really wanted to throw everything away over a misunderstanding. When that didn't work, he switched tactics, telling me somewhat calmly that if I just came back, his family would definitely forgive me and let it all go. It's like he's completely lost sight of what this whole situation is about. I want to scream at him that I don't need his or their forgiveness. In fact, it should be the other way around. I'm especially enraged with my Mill and Sil because they've taken their harassment to a new level. They've been terrorizing my mom and dad, demanding to know where I am. They created such a scene at my parents' place the other day that the neighbors got involved. My poor mom was beside herself, trying to stay composed while dealing with their vile accusations. They actually had the nerve to imply that my parents were complicit in ruining their family's reputation. The entire neighborhood was buzzing with gossip by the end of it. All of this has made me question what I've gotten myself into. Is this how my life is going to be from now on? Running around, doing chores, and groveling for the approval of James's ungrateful and appalling family? Is this what I signed up for when I said, I do? The thought of spending the rest of my life being treated like this makes me sick to my stomach. After that incident, I knew I couldn't keep silent any longer. I called James and told him, in no uncertain terms, that if he thinks for a second that I'm apologizing to any of his family members, he is beyond wrong. After what they did to me and my family, they are the ones who should be begging me for forgiveness. I was seething as I spoke, and I could tell he was taken aback by my tone. He started to say something, probably some weak attempt to justify their behavior, but I cut him off. I told him that he needed to resolve this feud more than I did because I didn't owe him or his family anything, but he would lose me the second he sided with them. I hung up before he could respond, my hands trembling with a mix of anger and adrenaline. I couldn't listen to his idiotic excuses anymore. Every time he tries to explain things, it only makes me realize how little he understands or maybe cares about my perspective. How could he expect me to stay in a situation where my feelings and needs are constantly dismissed? Since that call, I've been taking some time to really think about my next steps. I'm leaning more and more towards not going back to James. The more I reflect on our relationship, the more I see how one-sided it's been. I've always been the one to compromise, to bend over backward to make things work. But this time, I'm done. I'm done sacrificing my own happiness for people who clearly don't respect me. I know it's going to be a tough road ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm taking control of my own life. Thank you, Reddit, for helping me find the confidence I didn't realize I had. Reading through all your supportive comments and advice has been eye-opening. I've been so caught up in trying to make everyone else happy that I forgot about my own worth. Your words have reminded me that I deserve better, and for the first time, I'm starting to believe that. This community has given me the strength to stand up for myself, and I can't thank you enough for that. Update 2. Hi guys, I decided to move in with my parents for some time. I had 2 reasons. One was that I felt like I had stayed at my friend's place long enough, even though she insisted that I should stay longer. I didn't want to overstay my welcome, and I also didn't want to impose on her any more than I already had. The second reason was that I didn't want my parents to be alone the next time James's family decided to trouble them. Hopefully, there won't be a next time, but by now, I've learned that there's no predicting what they might do. Moving back home felt oddly comforting, like I was reclaiming a part of myself that I'd lost in the chaos of the last few weeks. My parents were relieved to have me there, and I could see how worried they'd been. It was nice to be surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being, without any ulterior motives. I started to settle into a routine, helping out around the house and spending time with my parents, which gave me the space I needed to clear my head. Then, something unexpected happened. A stranger reached out to me through a mutual friend. This stranger turned out to be James's ex-girlfriend, Pam. I was taken aback at first, wondering why she would want to contact me. But when she explained that she had heard about the whole incident and wanted to offer her support, I was curious. We exchanged a few texts, and eventually, we decided to meet for coffee. Meeting Pam was like looking into a mirror. She had a very similar story to mine, and as we talked, I realized just how eerily alike our experiences were. Pam told me that when she and James started dating, She also thought he was a family man who was deeply attached to his family. She admired his close relationship with them at first, just like I had. But then things started to change. Whenever they made plans to go out, somehow one or another family member would end up tagging along. It was never just the two of them, and they had zero privacy. Pam shared a particularly strange incident where they had planned a weekend getaway, something she had been looking forward to for weeks. But then, suddenly, James's mom claimed she wasn't feeling well. Worried, they took her to the doctor, but there was absolutely nothing wrong with her. It was as if she had faked the whole thing just to keep them from going away together. That's when Pam started to realize that this wasn't just a close-knit family, it was a family that was deeply controlling, to the point of being manipulative. Another thing Pam mentioned was how, whenever she was invited to family dinners, they expected her to help clean the table and wash the dishes afterward. It struck me as odd because, in my experience, when someone is invited over, they're treated as a guest, not as free labor. But in James's family, this was the norm. They didn't see Pam as a guest but as someone who needed to earn her place at the table. She told me about how demeaning it felt, especially when James never stepped in to help or defend her. He just went along with it, as if it was completely natural. Pam revealed that all of this was too overwhelming for her. She tried to talk to James about it, hoping he would understand and set some boundaries with his family. But James wasn't willing to hear her out. Whenever she tried to express her feelings, he turned it around on her, accusing her of not putting in enough effort, of not understanding how important family was to him. Pam tried to make it work for a while, but eventually, she realized that nothing was going to change. James was too enmeshed in his family's dynamics to ever truly prioritize his relationship with her. As I listened to Pam, I felt a deep sense of validation. Everything she described echoed what I had been going through. It was like James had a pattern pulling women into his life, only to suffocate them under the weight of his family's expectations. The more Pam talked, the more I realized that my situation was never going to improve if I stayed. James would always choose his family over me, no matter how unreasonable their demands were. After our conversation, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, but most importantly, clarity. I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. I wasn't overreacting. This was a pattern, and it was clear that James wasn't going to change. I talked things over with my parents afterward, and they were both incredibly supportive. They reassured me that I deserved better and that staying in a marriage where I was constantly disrespected wasn't worth it. Pam's story was the final push I needed. I knew, without a doubt, that I wanted to go ahead with the divorce. There was no point in staying in a marriage where I would always come second to a family that didn't value me. It was a hard decision, but it was the right one. I'm finally ready to take the steps to move on from this toxic situation and start rebuilding my life on my own terms. After everything I heard from Pam and the conversations I had with my parents, I knew what I needed to do. My lawyer would be informing James about my decision to file for divorce. The only thing we can hope for now is that the divorce is easier than everything that led to it. Update 3. Hi everyone. As I mentioned in the last update, I've decided to divorce James. The decision wasn't easy, but it was the best thing for me. I've already signed the divorce papers, but I'm still waiting to hear back from James. In the meantime, I'm trying to focus on getting back to my normal life. I'm pouring my energy into my career and taking steps to improve my mental well-being. I thought I could start moving forward, but things didn't go exactly as I had in mind. The other day, it was my friend's birthday, the same friend who took me in when everything first went downhill. She's been an incredible support throughout this entire ordeal, and she really wanted me at her party. To be honest, I was a little hesitant to go. The idea of facing everyone after all that had happened was daunting. I was terrified of the whispers and judgment, knowing that people were aware I got married and then decided to divorce in a span of about a month. It felt like the whole world was watching, waiting to see how I'd handle the embarrassment. But then I realized that if I hid now, I'd end up hiding forever. I couldn't let the fear of what others might think control my life. So, I decided to go. At first, it was all going well. People were much more understanding than I'd expected, and to my relief, no one seemed overly interested in my personal drama. The atmosphere was light, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to relax and enjoy the company of friends. It felt good to be out and about, to feel like a normal person again, even if just for a little while. But then, just when I was starting to feel like things might be okay, I saw James storm into the venue. My heart sank, and I froze on the spot. This was the last place I expected to see him, and the sight of him sent a wave of panic through me. How did he even know where I was? As soon as James spotted me, he made a beeline in my direction, his face twisted with anger. He didn't waste any time before launching into a tirade, demanding to know how I could do this to him. I tried to maintain my composure and put on my strongest face. I calmly asked him what he meant. Was I not allowed to attend my friend's birthday party now? But my response only seemed to provoke him further. He started making a scene, lecturing me in front of everyone about how I was destroying our sacred bond. In any other situation, I might have laughed at that comment, given how little he'd done to defend our marriage when it really mattered. What was sacred about a husband who stood by silently while his wife was disrespected and belittled by his family? I told him I didn't want to have any sort of conversation with him, especially not here, at my friend's place, during her birthday party. I tried to walk away, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but James wasn't having it. He followed me, his voice getting louder, and his words more erratic. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, one of the guys at the party stepped in. He calmly but firmly told James to back off and let me be. That's when James completely lost it. He didn't take the guy's intervention kindly and suddenly began screaming that I was cheating on him. He accused me of rushing into the divorce because I was having an affair. The accusation was so absurd that for a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. But James wasn't done. He lunged at the guy who had defended me, shouting in his face, demanding to know if we were having an affair. It was like watching a switch flip in James's head. He had gone from being angry and hurt to completely irrational. I was stunned. James knew that I didn't even know this guy well. He was just a friend of a friend, someone I'd barely spoken to before that night. But that didn't seem to matter to James. He was out of control, lashing out at anyone and anything in his path. His behavior was erratic, unhinged even, and it scared me. The party came to a screeching halt as people rushed to pull James away before things could get physical. My friend was in tears, apologizing for something that wasn't her fault, and the guy who stepped in to help me was trying to calm James down, even as James hurled baseless accusations at him. Eventually, a couple of guys managed to drag James out of the venue, but not before he turned to me one last time, his face contorted in a mix of anger and desperation, and shouted that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. As soon as he was gone, I felt the weight of what had just happened hit me like a ton of bricks. I was shaken, embarrassed, and more than a little scared. This was the man I had married, the man I had once thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, and now he was a stranger, someone I couldn't recognize or reason with. The realization that this was who he truly was, underneath all the charm and the facade, was heartbreaking. After the whole scene at the party, I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. I couldn't stop apologizing to my friend and the guy who had come to my rescue. They both assured me repeatedly that none of this was my fault, that I had nothing to apologize for, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I hadn't been there, everything would have been okay. My friend's birthday would have gone smoothly, without the drama James had caused. She hugged me tightly and told me that when everything settled down, we'd laugh about that day in the future, but at that moment, I couldn't imagine ever finding humor in what had happened. In the days that followed, I tried to process everything. I spoke with my parents and my lawyer, and they both agreed that this latest incident only reinforced that I was making the right decision by ending the marriage. It was clear that James was not only unwilling to accept the divorce but was also losing control in a way that made me fear for my safety, so I knew what I needed to do next. I decided to confront James's mother directly. I was done with playing nice and excusing their behavior. I called her and didn't waste any time getting to the point. I reminded her of all the times I had excused her and James's erratic behavior, all the times I had tried to keep the peace for the sake of the marriage. But I made it clear that my patience had run out. I told her that if James or any member of their family continued to harass me, my next step would be filing a restraining order. I could practically hear her seething over the phone, but I didn't back down. I reminded her of how much they bragged about James's prestigious and up-class job, and I pointed out that he'd lose it in a heartbeat if word got out that his wife had to file a restraining order against him. That got her real quiet, real fast. I wasn't done, though. I told her that it was in everyone's best interest that James signs the divorce papers and let this go. Unlike them, I had plenty of evidence to take them to court if they pushed me any further, and after everything I'd been through, I wouldn't hesitate to use it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when she finally spoke again, her tone had completely changed. She tried to suggest that we could all sit down and work things out, but I cut her off. There was nothing left to work out. This marriage was over, and the sooner they accepted that, the better it would be for everyone. I hung up feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. It was a relief to finally stand up to them, to make it clear that I wasn't going to be pushed around anymore. Very soon after that phone call, James signed the divorce papers. It was almost as if the threat of losing everything he and his family held dear finally forced them to face reality. My lawyer is now handling all the paperwork, and I've begun the process of officially closing this chapter of my life. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, things have quieted down. I want to thank all of you here for your support as well. When I first posted my story, I was scared and unsure, but the advice, encouragement, and kind words from this community gave me the strength to stand up for myself. I'm looking forward to what the future holds, and I know that with the support I've received, I can face whatever comes next with confidence and strength.